A fair bit of information in this video, just a little additional bits from that board that I showed you before of some missing pieces of information. Very, very important, because in today's task of the breakout groups, you're going to need to refer to a lot of these things. I'm going to try and run through them fairly quickly. The beauty of this YouTube is that you can go back at any point and re-look at this and listen to it again. So the first one is a photo taken from the section of your textbook that talks about the anaerobic glycolysis system. And it mentions the lactate inflection point, this thing here. Lactate inflection point refers to the moment when the body can just prevent the accumulation of hydrogen ions in the working muscle. So what's happening is our body is producing hydrogen ions, and every time we produce hydrogen ions, and that hydrogen ions is also producing lactate, which is a lactic acid, the body is able to take that lactic acid, or the lactate, in the bloodstream over to the liver, turn it back into glycogen, which is a great thing because it's more energy. However, this is an extra process that the body is going through. And if this body is now having to go through another process, as well as switching muscles on, breaking down ATP, breaking down phosphate creatine, trying to increase heart rate, trying to increase breathing rates, like a computer trying to run too many programs at once, something's got to give. And what ends up giving is the removal of these hydrogen ions from the muscles. So what ends up happening here is, excuse me, when we start to produce more lactate than what we are able to remove, we have actually gone to the point where lactic acid is being produced faster than it can be oxidized or broken down, which means transported into the bloodstream, taken to the liver, turned into glycogen again. The lactate will accumulate in the muscles, move into the bloodstream, and this is the point where we have the onset of blood lactate. So now not only is it building up in a negative aspect in our muscles, but it's starting to build up in a negative aspect in our bloodstream. This is the point here where the body is going to start really not working efficiently with its muscle contractions. Here's an interesting piece of information that came from your textbook as well. We mentioned how hydrogen ions are an acid, and we've talked about a pH scale. And a pH scale talks about how much acid or base, which is another word for alkali, the body has, and it wants to be right in the middle. It doesn't want too much acid or too much base, tipping us either way on that scale. So if we consume bicarbonate soda, which is an item that you can purchase at any supermarket, because this is an alkali, it will balance out the pH in the body when the body is producing hydrogen ions, which is an acid. So it's actually shown to improve performance on events from 3 to 10 minutes at a high intensity where we are going through the anaerobic glycolysis system, because the bicarbonate soda buffers some of those hydrogen ions out during production. This can cause some stomach upsets though, because we are automatically putting the bicarbonate soda in our body prior to exercise, which means we're actually filling the body with an alkali, which tips the pH out of whack for starters. This is some additional and high-end information for some of you who can understand it. I love this graph. This graph is table 6.7 from your textbook. I believe that you'll find it on page 127, and I think it's a great one to talk through. This person is running at 75% of their maximum heart rate. So if we take the formula of 220 minus your age gives you maximum heart rate, for a 20-year-old, for example, 200 beats per minute is their maximum, and 75% of that is 150 beats per minute. So roughly around there or just above for you guys. Stored ATP and phosphate creatine at running at 150 beats per minute of your heart rate, which is easy to measure, stored ATP and phosphate creatine would provide 30 seconds worth of energy. The amount of glucose in your bloodstream would provide you with 5 minutes worth of energy. The amount of glycogen that the liver is being able to produce, and we know how that process is happening from that lactate being transported there, gives us 20 minutes worth of exercise. That's a pretty good feedback point. The glycogen that's stored in our muscle from the carbs we've eaten, 150 minutes if somebody has eaten the right portion size of carbohydrates. Plasma, meaning bloodstream, free fatty acids and triglycerides. So these are the fats that we've eaten that are traveling around in our bloodstream. Only 2 minutes. Why? Because the body doesn't want to use fats for exercise. It wants to use it for stored low intensity exercise like sitting and standing. So here we go. Inside the muscle, triglycerides or fats, 120 minutes worth of exercise. What about stored fat around the body, that adipose tissue, the skin fat that we see on people? 2 to 3 days worth of energy ready to burn at 150 beats per minute, which takes a lot of oxygen, but it's good to know. This final one was a graph on page 129 that I really liked. It talks about the interplay, which is today's lesson, of the energy systems, all of them, as well as stored ATP, at both the 5-second and the 20-second point of a 200-meter sprint. So this is an all-out sprint. So 5 seconds in, we're using 15% of our stored ATP. Then we start to kick in. 54% of the energy we're getting at that 5-second mark is from phosphate creatine, which makes sense because there's only 2 to 3 seconds of stored ATP. So we've had to rely now on phosphate creatine, and it's quick. We've still got 29% of our energy coming from anaerobic glycolysis, so we're already building up a bit of lactic acid, and only 2% of our aerobic system. Why? Because at this point, we don't have enough oxygen from our heart rate and our breathing rate. And then at the 20-second point, we're down to 2% of stored ATP because it's all nearly gone. Phosphate creatine is only producing 31%. And we've got this anaerobic system giving us 46%, which is a large amount of that lactic acid building up at the 20-second stage. But the aerobic is slowly climbing because we are getting our breathing rate and our heart rate up to where it needs to be. I'm going to join the Zoom now, and what I'd like to ask you guys to do is be ready to take notes on one new piece of information, go into the breakout group that I'm going to assign you to, and then we're going to have to set ourselves up for the prac that we'll be completing tomorrow.